Xavier Whitmore sat in the back of the nearly empty bus, staring out the window as the city lights blurred past. He had built his transportation company from the ground up, starting with a single bus route 15 years ago. Now, he owned 15 routes across the city, each one carrying thousands of passengers every day. But lately, complaints had been rolling in: rude drivers, missed stops, broken-down buses. His managers assured him everything was under control, but Xavier wasn't convinced. So he decided to find out for himself. Dressed in worn jeans, a faded hoodie, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face, Xavier had spent the past week riding his own buses, blending in as just another passenger. No one recognized him. Most employees had never met him in person, and his face wasn't plastered all over the company website. He wanted the unfiltered truth, and so far, what he had seen wasn't great. But tonight, things took a turn. As the bus rolled through a quiet neighborhood, Xavier heard two voices behind him, a man and a woman, speaking in hushed tones. "I swear, if that guy doesn't stop messing with my schedule, I'm gonna lose it," the man muttered. Xavier kept still, listening. "Which guy?" the woman asked. "District manager," the man said. "He doesn't care about us. Cuts hours, overworks us, and then acts like we're the problem when we complain." The woman sighed. "I know. And half these buses are falling apart. You know they refuse to fix them until they completely break down? I had a door jam on me last week. Couldn't even open it. Had to make passengers climb out the back." Xavier's stomach tightened. He had heard rumors about this, but never with such clarity. The man let out a dry laugh. "And don't even get me started on the way they treat new drivers. My buddy quit last week, said the manager gave him the worst routes on purpose, just to mess with him." Xavier's hands curled into fists. He had built this company with the promise of fairness and respect for his employees. If what they were saying was true, something had gone seriously wrong. The woman lowered her voice. "I heard the big boss is some rich guy who doesn't even know what's happening." Xavier felt that one like a punch to the gut. He had worked his way up from nothing, but somewhere along the way, he had lost touch with his own people. The bus pulled to a stop, and the two workers stood up. Xavier turned slightly, catching a glimpse of their uniforms. They were his employees, one a driver, the other a maintenance worker. He needed to know more. As they stepped off, Xavier followed, keeping a careful distance. He wasn't done yet. Xavier trailed behind the driver and maintenance worker, keeping enough distance to avoid suspicion. They walked side by side down the quiet sidewalk, their conversation continuing in a lower tone. He caught fragments: complaints about scheduling, frustration with management, concerns over vehicle safety. Every word reinforced what he had already suspected. Something was deeply broken in his company. As they reached a small diner near the bus depot, they stepped inside, and Xavier hesitated before following. If he wanted answers, he needed to get close. The bell on the door jingled as he entered, and he chose a booth near the entrance, angling himself where he could observe without drawing attention. The two employees sat down at the counter, greeting the waitress like regulars. The driver, a stocky man with a short beard, leaned forward on his elbows while the woman, the maintenance worker, pulled out her phone, scrolling absently. Xavier flagged down a waitress and ordered a coffee, using the time to process what he had learned. He had trusted his district managers to oversee the day-to-day operations, but it was clear they had let things spiral. The way these two spoke, it was as if the employees were nothing more than numbers on a spreadsheet, easily moved, cut, or ignored. That wasn't how he had built this business. A new voice cut through his thoughts. The driver was speaking again. "They're gonna find a way to push me out, I swear," he said, shaking his head. "Got my hours cut again this week." And when I asked why, "Budget adjustments." The maintenance worker scoffed. "Meanwhile, they're hiring new guys who don't know what they're doing. I had to fix a mess last night because one of them didn't tighten a brake line properly. Almost caused an accident." Xavier's grip on his coffee cup tightened. That was beyond mismanagement, that was dangerous. If buses were going out with faulty repairs, it was only a matter of time before something catastrophic happened. A man in a wrinkled uniform entered the diner and approached them. The driver acknowledged him with a nod. "Joey, you're late." Joey dropped onto the stool beside them, rubbing his face. "Sorry, man. Got stuck waiting for the last bus. You know dispatch keeps messing with the timing on the night routes? I had passengers yelling at me all night, 'cause the schedules don't match what's posted." Xavier felt a slow burn of frustration. If dispatch was altering schedules without notifying drivers, It explained why complaints about missed stops and late arrivals had been piling up. The maintenance worker sighed. It's a joke, and don't expect it to get better. You hear about the new district manager? Guy doesn't care about anything but numbers. He cut the parts budget again. We're supposed to stretch resources. Joey let out a dry laugh. Stretch resources? What? Are we supposed to hope the brakes don't go out? Xavier had heard enough. Finishing his coffee in one gulp, he left a few bills on the table and walked out, his mind racing. He had thought he was running a company that valued safety and fairness. Instead, he was overseeing a system that was failing both his employees and his passengers. The next morning, he arrived at the main bus depot earlier than usual. The lot was already buzzing with activity drivers preparing for their routes, maintenance crews inspecting vehicles, dispatchers coordinating schedules. Instead of heading to his office, he made his way toward the maintenance bay. A young mechanic in grease-streaked coveralls was crouched by a bus, tightening a bolt. Xavier approached, watching for a moment before speaking. Morning. How's it looking? The mechanic glanced up, clearly not recognizing him. Rough, he admitted. This bus should have been pulled for a full inspection weeks ago, but we don't have the parts. Just patching it up for now. Xavier kept his expression neutral. Is that common? The mechanic wiped his hands on a rag. Lately? Yeah. We're short on parts, short on time, and short on people. Management keeps pushing for quicker turnaround, but that just means we're sending buses out that aren't 100%. Xavier nodded, thanking him before walking toward the dispatch office. He had heard enough from the workers. Now it was time to confront the people responsible. Inside, he found the district manager, a middle-aged man in a crisp button-down, sipping coffee while reviewing a stack of papers. Xavier stepped in and closed the door behind him. The manager looked up, surprised. Mr. Whitmore? I wasn't expecting you today. Xavier didn't bother with pleasantries. I've been riding my own buses this past week, talking to the employees. What I've heard is unacceptable. The manager's expression barely flickered. I assure you, sir, we're doing everything we can to maintain efficiency. Efficiency? Xavier's voice was sharp. You're cutting hours, overworking staff, and sending out buses that aren't safe. That's not efficiency, that's negligence. The manager set down his coffee. With all due respect, sir, running a business means making difficult choices. We have budgets to follow, and sometimes that means tightening operations. Xavier stared at him. Tightening operations? You're playing with people's livelihoods and risking passenger safety. That's not how this company is supposed to run. The manager sighed, as if dealing with an overreacting superior. I understand your concerns, but these decisions are necessary to keep things profitable. Xavier's jaw tightened. And what happens when a bus fails because of one of these necessary decisions? What happens when someone gets hurt? The manager hesitated, not out of concern, but calculation. He was weighing how to spin this. That was all Xavier needed to see. You're done here, Xavier said. Effective immediately. The manager's eyes widened. Sir, I. Collect your things and leave, Xavier cut in. I'll be restructuring this company from the ground up. The manager sputtered, but there was no room for argument. Xavier had made up his mind. As the man left, Xavier exhaled, already planning his next steps. He wasn't just going to fix the problems, he was going to make sure they never happened again. Xavier left the dispatch office with his mind set. He had no intention of simply swapping out one district manager for another and hoping for the best. The problems were deeper than one man's mismanagement. This was a systemic failure, and it was on him to fix it. Stepping onto the depot floor, he scanned the space. Workers were moving with purpose, but there was an underlying tension in the air, people pushing harder than they should, compensating for things they couldn't control. He caught sight of the driver and maintenance worker he had overheard the night before. They were standing near a row of parked buses, engaged in a quiet conversation. He approached with a steady pace. They noticed him when he was only a few steps away. The driver recognized him first, his expression shifting from indifference to surprise. The maintenance worker followed suit, her brow furrowing as if she wasn't sure what to make of him standing there. Xavier spoke before they could. I need to talk to both of you. The driver hesitated. Sure. The maintenance worker crossed her arms. What's this about? Xavier didn't dance around it. I heard you talking last night. At the diner. Their postures stiffened. The driver glanced at his coworker, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. The maintenance worker's jaw tightened. Xavier raised a hand. You're not in trouble. In fact, I need more of the truth you've been telling each other. The driver exhaled, shoulders relaxing slightly. All right. What do you want to know? Xavier gestured toward an empty corner of the lot, away from the movement of other employees. Once they were out of earshot, he folded his arms. I've been getting reports that things were off, but last night was the first time I heard it straight from the people affected. I want to know exactly how bad it is. No filters. The maintenance worker didn't hesitate. You don't need us to tell you. Walk through any of these garages, listen to any of the drivers. You'll hear the same thing. Buses breaking down, repair delays, schedules being changed last-minute. Management just expects us to deal with it, but it's not sustainable. The driver nodded. It's not just the conditions. It's the way we're treated. We're numbers to them. They don't care if we're exhausted, if we're struggling. Half the time, we don't even get consistent schedules. You can't build a life around a job that changes the rules on you every week. Xavier listened carefully. He wasn't just hearing complaints. He was hearing people who had been forced to adapt to dysfunction, who had learned to expect disappointment. The maintenance worker continued, voice firm. And it's not just about us. Every time a bus goes out in bad condition, passengers are put at risk. I've seen things patched up that shouldn't have been. If something serious happens, it won't be an accident, it'll be a failure that could have been prevented. Xavier's eyes sharpened. Give me specifics. What's the worst thing you've seen ignored because of budget cuts? The driver and maintenance worker exchanged glances. Then the driver exhaled. There was a bus last week. One of the rear suspension components was failing. It should have been pulled from service, but instead, they told the mechanics to reinforce it and send it back out. That bus carried over 30 people that day. If something had gone wrong, we could have been looking at a disaster. Xavier's fingers curled into his palm. No more second-hand reports, no more assumptions. He had his proof. He looked between them. If I start making changes, will the rest of the team back it? The maintenance worker nodded without hesitation. Absolutely. If they see it's real, if they see that someone actually cares, they'll follow. Xavier took in a slow breath. Then I'll make sure they see it. He turned on his heel and strode toward the center of the depot. Without hesitation, he climbed onto the nearest service platform, raising his voice so it carried across the space. Everyone, listen up. Heads snapped toward him. Conversations halted. Some employees recognized him immediately. Others took longer, but the murmurs spread fast. Xavier met their gazes head-on. I've spent the last week riding our buses. I've seen what you deal with firsthand. I've heard the way management has been cutting corners, pushing you beyond your limits, and ignoring safety concerns. That ends today. The depot was silent. Xavier continued, voice unwavering. Effective immediately, we are pulling any bus that isn't 100% safe. No more patch jobs, no more rushed repairs. If a vehicle isn't roadworthy, it doesn't leave this lot. A few mechanics exchanged surprised glances. Someone muttered, finally. Xavier wasn't done. Scheduling is getting a complete overhaul. No more unpredictable shifts, no more last-minute route changes that throw drivers under the bus. You deserve stability, and passengers deserve dependability. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Xavier met their eyes, one by one. And if any manager, supervisor, or dispatcher tries to push back against these changes, you come to me directly. My door is open. No more fear, no more silence. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a voice rang out. About damn time. A wave of agreement followed, some nodding, some clapping, others exhaling as if they had been holding their breath for too long. Xavier stepped down from the platform. The maintenance worker and driver were still nearby, watching him with something between disbelief and cautious optimism. The driver shook his head. Didn't expect that. Xavier gave a short nod. Didn't expect to have to do it. But I should have. The maintenance worker studied him for a beat before speaking. You think it'll stick? Xavier met her gaze. I'm not just making announcements. I'm making changes. And I'm staying involved to make sure they last. She considered that, then nodded. Then maybe this place has a chance. Xavier turned, scanning the depot, the faces watching him. He had built this company once. Now, he was going to rebuild it the right way. The next morning, Xavier arrived at the company's headquarters before sunrise. He hadn't slept much. His mind had been racing with everything he had learned, every decision that needed to be made. This wasn't just about fixing a few broken processes, it was about rebuilding trust, re-establishing the kind of company he had always intended to run. He walked through the quiet halls of the building, past rows of empty desks and darkened offices. Soon, the place would be bustling with employees, but for now, it was silent. He needed that. A moment to think before everything changed. In the conference room, he spread out the reports he had requested overnight. Safety logs, maintenance requests, driver complaints documents that should have been reviewed regularly but had clearly been neglected. As he flipped through them, patterns emerged. There had been multiple warnings about mechanical failures, dismissed with vague notes about temporary solutions. Scheduling complaints were met with automated responses, most of them brushing off legitimate concerns. It was clear that employees had been trying to raise these issues for months, maybe even years, and had been ignored. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. His assistant stepped in, looking hesitant. The meeting room filled quickly. Department heads, supervisors, and key managers took their seats, most of them unaware of what was coming. Some looked relaxed, expecting a routine discussion. Others, particularly those who had been complicit in the negligence, shifted uncomfortably. Xavier stood at the head of the table, hands resting on the reports. He let the silence stretch, watching their reactions. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but firm. I spent the last week riding our buses, speaking to employees, seeing firsthand how this company is actually operating. A few exchanged glances, but no one interrupted. What I found was unacceptable, he continued. Neglected maintenance, overworked employees, unsafe vehicles on the road. This is not the company I built. And it's not the company we're going to continue running. One of the operations managers, a man in his late 50s who had been with the company for over a decade, leaned forward. Sir, if there were issues, we would have addressed them. Xavier cut him off. You had the information. I'm looking at months of ignored reports, requests for repairs that were denied, scheduling complaints that were dismissed without real solutions. These aren't minor oversights. This is systemic neglect. A tense silence filled the room. Xavier turned to the head of maintenance. Tell me, how many buses right now should be out of service due to safety concerns? The man hesitated, glancing at the others before answering. At least 20. Maybe more. Xavier's expression didn't change. And yet, they're still on the road. The maintenance head shifted uncomfortably. We've been under pressure to keep as many operational as possible. There's been pushback when we flagged vehicles. Xavier turned his attention to the head of scheduling. And how many drivers have had their shifts changed without notice in the last 30 days? The woman hesitated, then sighed. A lot. We've been prioritizing efficiency. Xavier held up a hand. Stop. I don't want excuses. I want accountability. The room was silent. We're making changes. Effective immediately, all unsafe buses are pulled from service until they are fully repaired. No exceptions. Any dispatcher caught altering schedules without proper notice will be removed. And from now on, every employee will have a direct channel to report issues, one that doesn't get lost in a pile of budget considerations. The tension in the room was palpable. Some of the managers looked uncomfortable, but others, particularly those who had been trying to do the right thing, looked almost relieved. Xavier leveled his gaze at them. If you can't operate under these new standards, you're free to leave. But if you stay, understand this: we do things differently from now on. One of the supervisors, a woman who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. I've been trying to raise concerns about this for months. But every time I did, I was told to focus on the numbers. Xavier nodded. That's over. If there's a problem, I want to hear about it. And I want it solved. He turned back to the group. The only way this company moves forward is if we rebuild trust both with our employees and with the public. That starts today. The meeting ended with a quiet urgency. Some managers lingered, talking in hushed tones. Others left quickly, clearly unsettled by the shift in leadership. Xavier knew not everyone would adjust. Some might resist the changes. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that the company was finally going in the right direction. By midday, mechanics were already pulling unsafe buses from rotation. Dispatchers were adjusting schedules to give drivers more stability. Word spread fast through the company. Xavier wasn't just making promises. He was making real changes. As he walked through the depot later that afternoon, he noticed employees watching him, some with cautious optimism, others with quiet approval. The driver and maintenance worker he had overheard on the bus stood near one of the service bays. When they saw him, they exchanged a look before approaching. The driver nodded. Didn't think I'd see the day. Xavier met his gaze. Neither did I. But we're here now. The maintenance worker studied him for a moment. "We'll hold you to it." Xavier smiled slightly. "Good. I expect nothing less." As he left the depot, he knew this was only the beginning. Fixing trust, rebuilding morale, ensuring long-term change, it wouldn't happen overnight. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was running the company he had always intended to build. Xavier spent the next several days embedded in the day-to-day operations, ensuring that the changes he had ordered weren't just theoretical. He had learned the hard way that words meant nothing if they weren't followed by action, and he wasn't about to let momentum slip. He started his mornings at the maintenance base, watching mechanics work on the buses that had been pulled from service. Some of the repairs were straightforward worn brake pads, faulty wiring, minor engine issues, but others were alarming. One vehicle had a corroded suspension mount that should have been replaced months ago. Another had a transmission issue that had been patched, so many times it was a miracle it still ran. The lead mechanic, a man with graying hair and permanently stained hands, explained that they had been forced to prioritize only the most urgent issues due to budget constraints, leaving these borderline cases to limp along far past their safe limits. Xavier authorized immediate purchases of all necessary parts, bypassing the usual bureaucratic approval process. Some of the managers in the corporate office might balk at the expense, but he wasn't interested in their opinions right now. His priority was making sure no bus left the depot in an unsafe condition ever again. From there, he moved to the dispatch center, sitting in on calls and observing how routes were assigned. He quickly noticed a pattern. Certain drivers were consistently given the worst shifts early mornings with back-to-back long routes, or late nights that left them exhausted the next day. When he asked about it, a dispatcher shrugged and said that some drivers just handle the rougher schedules better. Xavier didn't buy it. After pulling reports, he confirmed what he suspected: favoritism was at play. A handful of senior drivers were being given cushy, predictable routes while newer or less connected employees were left scrambling with erratic schedules. That ended immediately. He made it clear that assignments would be rotated fairly, with transparency in scheduling decisions. His presence didn't go unnoticed. Employees who had once assumed upper management was indifferent to their struggles started speaking up more. A driver approached him in the break room, cautiously explaining how the GPS systems in several buses were unreliable, often giving incorrect route updates that led to missed stops and frustrated passengers. Xavier had heard scattered complaints about navigation issues before, but now that he was on the ground, he saw how frequently it happened. He called in the technology team and ordered a system-wide overhaul. In the evenings, he checked in with station supervisors, ensuring that the culture was shifting. Some adjusted quickly, welcoming the changes. Others resisted, grumbling that things had worked fine before. Those who couldn't adapt were quietly phased out. Xavier had no patience for leadership that put ego over improvement. One night, as he walked through the depot, he spotted the driver and maintenance worker he had overheard on the bus that first night. They were leaning against a tool cart, deep in conversation. When they noticed him, there was a brief pause before the maintenance worker nodded in acknowledgement. Without preamble, she told him that morale had noticeably improved. Mechanics weren't being forced to cut corners anymore, and drivers were no longer dreading unpredictable shifts. The driver added that while some were still skeptical, most employees were starting to believe this wasn't just temporary. That was exactly what Xavier wanted to hear. He wasn't naive. He knew that real change took time, and consistency would be the key. But if people were beginning to trust that things were different, that meant he was on the right track. Later that week, he held a meeting with a select group of employees, drivers, mechanics, dispatchers, and supervisors to discuss long-term improvements. He didn't speak much at first. Instead, he listened. They talked about outdated policies, inefficiencies in the route planning system, and the need for more comprehensive training for new hires. Instead of making empty promises, Xavier took notes, asking pointed questions about what concrete steps could be taken to fix each issue. By the time the meeting ended, there was an energy in the room that hadn't been there before. Employees who had once felt ignored now saw that their input mattered. Over the following days, he continued making unannounced visits to different locations, checking that policies were being followed and ensuring that no one was quietly trying to revert back to the old ways. At every stop, he made it clear that this wasn't a temporary crackdown, it was the new standard. One afternoon, he received a call from his assistant. informing him that a local journalist had caught wind of his undercover investigation and wanted to do a story on the company's transformation. At first, Xavier hesitated. He wasn't doing this for publicity. But then he realized that transparency mattered. If employees and the public saw that leadership was holding itself accountable, it would reinforce the commitment to lasting change. He agreed to the interview. When the article was published, it detailed the problems he had uncovered and the steps being taken to fix them. Employees who had once felt powerless now saw their concerns validated in print. Passengers who had complained about unreliable service saw that their frustrations weren't being ignored. A week later, as Xavier prepared to leave the depot for the night, he noticed something different. Employees weren't just going through the motions anymore. There was a shift in the atmosphere. Conversations were lighter, movements more assured. People were no longer just enduring their jobs, they were taking pride in them again. It wasn't a perfect system yet. There was still work to be done, still obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in a long time, Xavier felt certain of one thing. The company he had built was finally back on the right path.